Hello, welcome to my channel. My name's Nathan Hatch. I talk about health and wellness, and I write about it as well. If you've not been here before, I usually talk about a topic, and then we take questions and answer, and I give answers as best as I can. um, if you're watching the VOD, you can skip forward to when the main topics start. Usually around I'll give people 10 minutes or so to trickle in here. I haven't given very much notice for this stream, so we might not have a lot of attendees, but yeah, anyway, we're going to be talking about ADHD. So if you want to know about that or anything else, keep listening. I'll be back in a few minutes after people get in here. Hey, getting started soon. Yep, everything seems to be working. Okay, well, I'm back earlier-ish. I'm getting kind of impatient. I want to start. So anyway, welcome to my stream. If you miss the open, I'm Nathan Hatch. I talk about health stuff, lots of shit. Anything you want to during these podcasts as well. If you come and join, we chat about things. If you want to know more about my book and work, you can find links below the video to my Twitter, my website, to my Patreon account if you want to support these streams. I'm not able to do this stuff except for support from people like you, so I greatly appreciate my supporters. Just to catch people up too, I've been working a lot on my update. I know a lot of people are very excited about it. I have now been talking about it for a very long time. It's still not done, so I apologize for that, but I am still making very good progress on it. Science just is hard, and it takes a lot of work. And it's not, I also keep giving dates on like when the book is going to be updated, as if I can determine when I get results, which I can't do. Like doing research, obviously is like I have to discover things and figure them out, and that takes time and fate. So but it is progressing though, so it's good. So it'll be out in a little while. So anyway, I wanted to talk about ADHD. I don't work with people with ADHD very often, but I do see it a lot, especially in social media and stuff like that. People talking about ADHD, and it is a problem or an issue that some people deal with. Some people have ADHD and they don't really even know it either. ADHD is basically marked by an inability to, kind of sit still and focus, especially when you need to. It's a restlessness and being easily distracted by, novel experiences. And a lot of people don't really understand it. And there's a lot of medication out there that supposedly treats it. But as I frequently mention on this channel, lots of pharmaceuticals only treat symptoms of conditions. They don't really resolve them, or else we wouldn't still have, things like diabetes and cancer and all that kind of stuff. And ADHD and depression and PTSD and anxiety disorders, are no different. Most of the medications that are on the market to treat those are really just treat the symptoms of those conditions. They don't really resolve the underlying condition. So then people who have these ADHD and depression and other, stress associated problems continue to suffer and persist with these for years and years and years of their lives. And so, my work aims to enlighten and educate people to how to actually address these through nutrition and environment and behavior and other strategies that can alter them based on, knowing how they work fundamentally. So I've talked about ADHD before on other streams because it is related to, and that's why I kept saying depression and PTSD and stuff like that, because ADHD is related to conditions like depression, bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, because they all are caused or related to different combinations of different catecholamines. And the catecholamines are dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. Adrenaline is, obviously like one of our primary stress hormones, and its function and dysfunction are related to lots of these conditions of restlessness and depression and post-traumatic stress disorder and things like that, because adrenaline is one of our primary stress hormone. One of the major functions that adrenaline accomplishes in the body is the release of glucose from storage in the body. Glucose is stored primarily as the structure called glycogen, which is it's kind of like the human equivalent of starch that's in plants. Starch in plants is a major storage form of glucose, and when we eat potatoes or bread or any potato chips, like anything that's starchy, it gives us a big dose of glucose, and is one of the reasons that foods that are high in starch taste so yummy is because they lower adrenaline. And the reason they lower adrenaline is because adrenaline's job is to help maintain blood sugar levels by controlling the release of glucose from glycogen. So if you eat glucose, that has the same effect. So it's a self-regulating or a regulatory feedback mechanism that's involved in the maintenance of blood sugar. And its dysregulation, in turn, causes dysregulation of blood sugar, or conversely, if you don't eat enough sugar, that also raises your adrenaline excessively, which also can cause dysfunctional adrenaline effects on your body because of excess adrenaline and its role in trying to promote normal blood glucose homeostasis. And if you're familiar with my work, you'll know that conditions like adrenaline, conditions like depression. Sorry, I had some extra time today, and I just why don't I just get on and stream with no planning? But I wanted to chat, and I wanted to talk about ADHD anyway. So I got to get my brain in the correct mode here. Okay, so I've talked about depression quite a bit, and I think there's like 2 or 3 different streams in this in my channel here where I talk about depression, because it is such a ubiquitous condition that so many people suffer today. And very often people with ADHD very often also have depression, or sometimes varying degrees of it. Usually people with severe depression won't really have ADHD. But if you have ADHD, you might have marginal depression. The reason for and this is important to understand for ADHD as well. So the reason for depression is because dopamine is actually our primary happiness hormone. There is a misconception in the general medical industry that serotonin is our happiness hormone. And I won't get into the details here, but that's actually completely wrong. I talk about that in my book and also in the other streams on here. Serotonin is actually a hormone of torpor, which slows down the human metabolic rate. Serotonin and its analog melatonin, which is made from serotonin, are actually hormones of hibernation. They facilitate mammalian hibernation by inducing torpor. Torpor slows down the metabolic rate so that our tissues don't overconsume glucose and other nutrients that are really important for our survival. And so serotonin was mistaken as a cure for depression, because back when depression was being studied, it was mostly being studied on manic depression, which we now call bipolar disorder. And serotonin can have anesthetizing effects. It can, if you're having a manic episode, it can mellow you out because it is, again, a hormone of torpor. But torpor is not happiness. Torpor is anesthetization. It's a subduing of your vitality. That's the whole purpose of hibernation, is to lower the metabolic rate. Dopamine, in fact, is actually our happiness hormone, which is also why dopamine is associated with a lot of reward-seeking behavior that is so often denigrated in the human condition. But reward behaviors can be things like giving your family a hug and making new friends and doing your homework and stuff like that. So that's just kind of a review of those things. If you want to know more about that, go look up my streams on here on depression and hair loss and addiction and stuff like that. Those all talk about this stuff. But underlying depression is a depletion of dopamine, because adrenaline is also made out of dopamine. So the cascade is that when you're happy and excited, you produce dopamine. But if you have low blood sugar or you have stress, then that dopamine gets converted into adrenaline, which is a lot like dopamine. It's like a enhanced version of dopamine. It's more aggressive. It gets you really energized and raring to go, and that it primes your cells for action. That's part of why when you have the fight or flight response, your body releases adrenaline in order to amp up your glucose circulation so that your cells can actually work harder to meet the stress of those situations you might encounter in a fight or flight response. Because of excess stress and probably poor dietary habits as well, or diets in general, not just habits, it's very easy to actually deplete your body of dopamine, and that can cause that leads to depression. And dopamine in turn is made out of the amino acid tyrosine, which can also be made out of the amino acid phenylalanine. And so there's a whole chain from phenylalanine to tyrosine to L-dopa to dopamine to noradrenaline to adrenaline, and there's others in there too that I don't remember at the moment. But there's this whole chain of the catecholamine pathway that is relevant to conditions like ADHD and depression and PTSD and yeah. So okay, so in depression you have a depletion of dopamine, but in ADHD what you have is a sort of chronically elevated level of adrenaline. It's not enough to cause catastrophic mental health disorders like depression and PTSD and phobias and stuff like that. But your adrenaline is elevated enough that you never really get to relax. I mean, and that's the entire thing that you experience when you have ADHD. You just like can't sit still, right? You're just kind of bouncing around, and like, you know, you're at pains to focus. You know, something interesting comes along and you just immediately get distracted by it. That's what adrenaline does, and most people understand this intuitively. That, like, you know, when you're trying to do things like sit down and watch a movie, or do some work that you need to do, maybe some boring menial task, maybe even just trying to read, can be extremely difficult. And the reason behind this, the reason why adrenaline does this, and because a lot of people don't really understand this function of adrenaline, and this is really important with ADHD, and one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it, is that stress hormones, part of their purpose is to actually motivate action in us as human beings. In evolutionary terms, we as human beings, you know, have not really, through most of our history, had the kinds of technology and society that we have. We didn't have ready access to food and entertainment and shelter and safety and stuff like that. As wild animals, you know, we were highly, highly dependent on our environment, on our social support through our fellow human beings and our family. And when you had deprivations in any of those resources, it elicits a stress response in human beings, and it still does today. You know, you can think about it, like if you have volatile interpersonal relationships, or if you you know, get really hungry, or if something that you're afraid of happens, like let's say you have some financial stress, like an unexpected financial difficulty or something. I just had an experience yesterday where my landlord just surprised me with a new random monthly charge as a way to try to increase my rent, and it really got my blood boiling, because it's a direct, you know, financial stress. Like these kinds of things actually, you know, do elicit the fight or flight response, because as evolutionary human beings, we need to be aware of potential threats to our person, but also have the energy and motivation to solve them and to meet those challenges. And so one of the primary functions of stress hormones, and especially adrenaline, is to motivate action. Dopamine motivates reward, but then you increase the energy more through the function of adrenaline, and that gets your brain running, and the way we respond to that is purposefully to be restless. One of the problems with understanding ADHD is that nothing actually is wrong with your body. Your body is actually working as it's supposed to be working in response to the environment and other factors that are actually increasing that adrenaline response. And then because adrenaline motivates action, and you have chronically elevated adrenaline, not so much that your heart's beating all the time, but it's just enough to prevent you from being able to sit down and relax and focus, because one of the primary effects on our brain and physiology as a human being from adrenaline is to do something about it. So literally your body is trying to get you to get up and go do stuff. And so then that becomes counterintuitive to what you might be trying, you know, to do with your life or your time when you do have ADHD. And then you take medications that try to counteract that effect, but they can't cure it. All they do is treat those symptoms, so then you end up enduring it for years and years and years of your life. As an aside, anyway, hi, for those of you who are here. we talk and chat, and if you like want to ask me questions about stuff, go right ahead. And very if the question's not really relevant to what I'm talking about, then I'll get to it at the end of what I'm going to chat. This probably won't be a very long stream, but I just wanted to get on because I had some time today. But anyway, okay. So when you have ADHD, you have a chronic elevation of adrenaline, and then that is motivating your brain to try to find novel reward scenarios, discovery and creative problem solving. And I was thinking about this too because I was watching one of my favorite streamers, but I won't say their name because I don't want to like talk about people's health conditions specifically. But they always talk about their ADHD. And it's really funny because ADHD personalities make for great entertainment because they're constantly looking for new stimuli and entertainment, and they are being entertaining themselves because they remember adrenaline increases your energy levels through stress pathways. Hi, Wonder Bunny. Thanks. Welcome. Thank you for being here. So because people with ADHD are like, amped up and have generally elevated amounts of energy and also need to be creatively satisfied, they make for good social media creators because you constantly have this like low level of adrenaline that is like keeping you constantly amped up and needing to do stuff and needing to be entertaining and need to be entertained. And so they actually make great content creators. But a highly elevated or chronically elevated adrenaline is well, okay, so I talk about this in my book that like no health conditions ever happen in isolation. And in fact, I also describe it that specific health conditions are actually kind of a red herring. There's not really any such thing as categorized diseases. They are all one state of ill health, of non-health. Like we have a state of health and then a state of non-health. And how that non-health develops, you can use descriptive terminology and categorization to help, facilitate communication and information exchange. But in reality, they're not separate diseases. And that misunderstanding is what leads to chronic suffering from metabolic illness for years and years and years, is because just like, dogs have a dog diet and cats have a cat diet and birds have a bird diet, humans have a human diet and environmental needs that need to be met in order to be healthy. And then when those things are not met, then we develop disease. And so just going on medication doesn't ever really solve these problems because it's not addressing the holistic whole body. And ADHD never really happens in isolation either. The people that I see with ADHD often present with other symptoms of excessive adrenaline expression. For instance, adrenaline also cuts off blood circulation to the peripheral tissues, including the skin and scalp. And so people that have ADHD will often present with premature and aggressive hair loss. And my streamer that I enjoy does present with like significant hair loss for their age. I think they're only like 26 or something like that. So they like there are other complications that come along with these things. There is never just like one condition. Usually you'll present with like 2 or 3, or maybe, in my case, having cystic fibrosis my whole life, present with very many conditions. So it's not just, resolving any one condition. It's about resolving all of them, which is things that pharmaceutical medications usually can't do anyway, because they're not even intended to cure disease in the first place. They're only intended to make money off of symptoms for the pharmaceutical industry. So anyway, so then you just keep continuing to suffer from ADHD your entire life. So the fundamental problem behind ADHD is a chronic elevation of adrenaline, because adrenaline literally forces your body to do stuff. So when you have to not do stuff, you find it extremely difficult. I remember, and I didn't even notice that I had ADHD when I was younger because I had so many other even more severe health problems. But my ADHD manifested in scenarios like for instance, like I love going to the movie theater. movies are so fun, and I love being in a theater, and I love getting popcorn, and I love sitting with my boyfriend or friends and watching a film. It's just fantastic. But for like the entirety of my 20s, whenever I would go to a movie theater, I'd be so excited and so happy that I was there, and it was like a fun night out, and I'm with people that I like, and we get the ticket, and it's such a ritual. And then I go into the theater and sit down, and literally before the previews were even over, my brain would be going, fuck, I don't want to be here. I can't stand sitting. I can't wait till the movie's over. And I would hate it so much because I wanted to sit and enjoy the movie like so badly. And I couldn't. And the whole time, I'd just be shifting around the whole time and, changing my leg positions and just kind of like bouncing in my seat and talking to people, which, it can be fun, but can also be disruptive in a theater. And that's what ADHD is. Your body having a chronically elevated state of adrenaline is in a constant state of the fight or flight response. So you're unable to just sit and relax and enjoy yourself and focus especially when you need to. So that's what ADHD is. So now let's talk about like what you do about it and how you treat it. So like I mentioned earlier, serotonin and melatonin have been misunderstood as antidotes to depression and other mental health illnesses, and they're not. They are hormones of torpor that mediate the torporific state, which can be described or demonstrated in the state of hibernation that most mammals, that a lot of mammals have. But obviously, as human beings, we don't hibernate anymore, right? It'd be really funny if we did. We'd I think I've mentioned this on a stream before, but I just think it'd be really funny if as humans we hibernated still, and at the onset of winter, we all just went into our homes and didn't come out for 3 months, or 4 or 5 months, depending on where you live. It's not just a coincidence that we don't hibernate anymore. This is part of our evolutionary past and our makeup as an animal. We still possess pathways and responses for hibernation, but we don't hibernate as a species because somewhere along our evolutionary past, we also developed an anti-hibernation response. And that actually is adrenaline. When we as a human being start to experience the elevations in serotonin and melatonin that occur at the change in light levels during the onset of wintertime, our body cranks up the adrenaline release just a little bit, just enough to keep you from going into a hibernation response. This is actually what you feel at the onset of winter, and I've mentioned this too in my other streams on depression. But it doesn't cheapen your feelings at all. But but it does. It's not really the excitement of winter. When you start to feel winter coming on, and you start to get excited for the winter season, and upcoming holidays, that excitement is actually the elevation in adrenaline that is inhibiting the hibernation response. It's not really excitement for the season. It's excitement because adrenaline is the feeling of excitement. I mentioned this too in my book. A lot of people don't understand this, that our feelings are hormones. Progesterone, the hormone, is the feeling of empathy. Cortisol is the feeling of anxiety. Dopamine is happiness. Serotonin is actually shame and guilt, actually. And adrenaline is the hormone, the feeling of excitement. And so at the onset of winter, when the sun starts to dip in the horizon and the quality of the wavelengths of sunlight changes, that induces a rise in serotonin and melatonin to induce torpor so that we can survive wintertime better. But our body also increases adrenaline in order to counteract that response. There's lots of other things that increase adrenaline, like not eating frequently, keeping if your blood sugar drops, your body will release adrenaline. So then that releases sugar from glycogen storage to keep your blood sugar level. And then when you continue not to eat after that happens, then your body releases cortisol, and then cortisol is even more destructive because cortisol catabolizes your lean muscle tissue into usable sugars and amino acids so that you don't die. If you have the habit of waking up in the morning and not eating breakfast, that directly contributes to conditions like ADHD and depression and PTSD and anxiety, because you very rapidly transition from high adrenaline to high cortisol, and then cortisol starts to tear down your internal organs, and it completely eviscerates your glycogen stores. And because you then don't have any sugar in your body, your cells aren't able to run properly. They don't produce enough energy, and your whole body starts to succumb to stress and ages more rapidly and causes metabolic disease. It's really, really destructive. But in ADHD, those acute transient triggers of adrenaline are not the primary cause, although they can be. The primary cause literally is just sunlight deficiency, like you're not getting enough sunlight. So you can induce an artificial winter response because of our mammalian physiology. Remember, we descend from animals that evolved in climates that were colder, and because we dinosaurs ruled the earth when mammals first started emerging. And we evolved in parts of the world that there were less dinosaurs and we were more likely to survive, which were the colder climates. Hello, 911. Because of that, we also could not survive in colder climates because without like strategies for it, because food disappears during the wintertime usually. And so as a mammal, we developed the hibernation response as an evolutionary tool to be able to survive and evolve away from predators that dominated the rest of the planet. And that's one of the reasons too why we survived the extinction of the asteroid extinction event, was because we could hibernate. And mammals at the time too were very, very small. But then over the millennia, the eons, the ages, we became human beings, and somewhere along that pathway, we evolved an anti-hibernation response. And then in the last and not even a long time ago, like literally just in the last 100 years, maybe like 300 or 400 years, have we as human beings lived so much indoors. Normally, even when we developed, obviously cities and agriculture, most of us as human beings spent most of our time outdoors all the time. Nowadays hi Jamal, welcome, nice to see you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're doing well too, 911. I didn't say that when I saw you. So you can inadvertently nowadays, because of our technological advancements, spend so much time indoors that you actually give yourself a pseudo hibernation response as a human being, the same one that we get during wintertime. And it gets worse too, because if you go from wintertime into summer, always being indoors, you just never come out of that winter hibernation response. And so you have chronically elevated serotonin, melatonin, and adrenaline as the anti-hibernation response. And serotonin and melatonin, remember, down-regulate the metabolism. They're hormones of torpor. They have very specific and important roles in our body, but when they're elevated excessively for chronic periods of time, they inhibit your metabolic rate chronically. And then our body releases adrenaline in response to that. And then adrenaline makes us restless and seeking reward and experience. But also cuts off blood flow to the skin so that you start to lose hair over long periods of time. That can then induce erectile dysfunction. And when I say erectile dysfunction, I also mean women. Women can get erections. People with vaginas also get erections. It's not just men. They're just smaller. And depression and all these other things happen because of chronic light deficiency. And unfortunately, a lot of our culture, especially, talk about content creators, a lot of us literally just spend all of our time indoors all the time. There's so much to do indoors nowadays with TV and video games and work, are all done on computers. It can be very hard to actually get outside enough to actually reverse sunlight deficiency that underlies ADHD conditions like ADHD and depression and erectile dysfunction, like hypogonadism. Hypogonadism, when you're when your reproductive organs don't produce enough sex hormones, and it leads to weight gain and low libido. You know, those all are very, very responsive to sunlight exposure and the hormones of torpor and stress hormones. Some people take melatonin to help them sleep at night because they've heard that melatonin is a hormone for sleeping, which it is, but it's also a stress hormone backup for sleep. Our primary facilitator of sleep is actually GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. And when you're deficient in GABA, then melatonin always rises, but it rises more when you're deficient in GABA. But also melatonin is also how children's bodies are kept from going through puberty. Like people that don't know about biology just think that children like don't go through puberty just because until it's time. But the body facilitates those things through different physiological pathways. One of the primary ones in that is melatonin. When you take really high melatonin, it actually downregulates your sex hormone production. So you get less testosterone or less progesterone, and estrogen as a woman. And so like taking melatonin, because it's part of the torporific pathway, will also induce chronic adrenaline activation. And ironically too, it can actually be very hard to sleep when you have excess torporific hormones. So people are more likely to take things like melatonin when they have ADHD or depression or insomnia, when those problems are actually caused by melatonin, and then it makes it worse. You might get a few good nights sleep when you start melatonin, but then that benefit quickly wears off. Then people are popping like huge amounts, because that's not actually how the body works. Then the body, when you're taking melatonin, the body's constantly trying to lower the melatonin because the melatonin is so inhibitory of so many important metabolic pathways. Part of the reason, and a lot of people don't understand this, hibernation is not sleep. When bears go into hibernation, they are not sleeping. They will actually come out of hibernation to sleep, and then they will wake up from sleep and then go back into hibernation. That's one of the reasons why it's also hard to sleep, ironically, when you have chronic light deficiency and elevation of serotonin and melatonin and adrenaline, is because those things directly interfere with the sleep pathways, which is instead mediated by low stress hormones and low torporific hormones and high GABA function, which requires sunlight and sugar and salt and all these other nutrients that we need in our environment, like I talk about in my book. Ultimately, okay, and then some of the other factors that can also contribute to ADHD is like chronic inflammation, because inflammation always elicits stress hormones as well. And is mediated by inflammatory like cytokines and also the torporific hormones. So if you're eating like common wheat foods, because gluten in common wheat is so inflammatory, it's just really unhelpful. And diets high in polyunsaturated fats really promote high inflammation. So then you'll also have really high adrenaline and torporific hormones from those things. But primarily it's a sunlight deficiency. And so, if you keep your blood sugar up, eat tons of fruit, always eat breakfast, always eat breakfast. Never have coffee before you have some source of sugar, even if it's just like a glass of orange juice, or an orange or an apple. You need to have keep your blood sugar up. That every time that you eat sugar, and salt. So basically like the sister nutrient that's involved in the adrenaline response with carbohydrate is also sodium. And that's also why like eating salty foods is so enjoyable. It's just fantastic, right? Like it's because you're getting both carbohydrate and salt, and both of those things lower your stress hormones. Because salt is the chemical driver behind cellular activation, and carbohydrate is the fuel that supplies it. So when you have adrenaline response, your body actually dumps potassium that antagonizes sodium, so that sodium has a greater influence over cellular metabolism, and that drives cellular activation. So when you eat salt, that increases this effect of sodium on your cells. So then adrenaline drops because it doesn't need to do that anymore, especially if you have some carbohydrate in there. So if you eat plenty of food, keep your blood sugar up, eating sodium too as well. And then you also get sun exposure. That combination, and every single day, I'm talking, and this is one of the major problems. When I even people that have read my book, when I talk to them about the effects of sunshine on our physiology, they will tell me that they're making sure they get at least half an hour of sunlight a day. Like, no, like that's not even close to understanding what's going on. Like, we literally evolved as a species living out under the open sunshine for most of the day. Like a lot of animals do, we would take a nap and sleep in the shade or under cover in the hottest part of the day in the afternoon. But we're outside in the sun all day long as human beings. Half an hour a day is not going to cut it. Our physiology is absolutely not designed to live in these caves that we live in. And, in this apartment that I live in too, I've been noticing, I've been having actually increased sunlight deprivation stress, because even though I have a large window, like I just live in a studio, but I have this like large sliding glass door, it's heavily tinted. So even when I'm sitting in here and next to this giant window, it's probably a good 20% reduction in sunlight, but it's not just the amount, it's the types of wavelengths that it blocks. That's also part of the problem, because our physiology is so sensitive to the different types of wavelength that is available. We literally evolved for millions and millions and millions of years to respond physiologically to the different compositions of wavelengths in sunlight directly. So even like sitting by a window, nowadays we have this technology, energy efficiency technology, that blocks certain wavelengths of light in glass that is very important for our physiology. And so when you're saying like, oh, you're getting half an hour of sunlight, like, where did you get that number? Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's not always possible to do this, but you should aim every single day to get at least 2 hours of sunshine exposure every single day. Obviously, like, I don't even do that, right? That's not totally possible, but that is what we need. So when you get any less than that, you are incurring a sunlight deficiency. It does not need to be, don't risk sunburn. You should not do sun exposure at times of day and durations. Like, you don't go out at high noon for 2 hours. Like, you don't need to do that unless you're like really tan. And, and also you can do that like in the early spring and late fall, like, the light is going to be more gentle, right? But like, there's no need to get sunburned. This is not about tanning or sunburning or anything like that. It's the direct influence of light exposure to bared skin and eyes. So, a little clothing as possible, no sunglasses, no hat, nothing. 2 hours a day. That is what you need to be healthy, not like 15 minutes or half an hour. Like, that's not going to do it at all. I think those ideas come from old studies on yes, Jay. Hi, Jay. Yes, you need to start eating breakfast. You cannot skip breakfast. Like most people don't understand that, like, the time of day when your stress hormones are at their highest is in the morning when you wake up from sleeping. Unless you don't eat, and then they continue to get even worse because you've been sleeping all night without eating, right? And not only are you not eating when you're asleep, your body is using stored glycogen and fuel, and amino acids and everything. And so you have to replenish that. We, as a mammalian species, we are, one of the reasons that we're still around as human beings while other of our primate relatives are not, is because we are very, very good at surviving nutritional stress. One of the reasons that animals like primates don't make our own vitamin C is because vitamin C activates cellular respiration and promotes a high consumption of nutrients, of fuel substrate. And by losing, because most animals actually synthesize their own vitamin C. Actually, as an aside, if you have a dog or a small animal that has dry eye syndromes, stop giving them tap water, the chlorine in the tap water destroys their endogenously synthesized vitamin C. I had this adorable dog a long time ago named Brahms, who I found on the street, and he had terrible eye infections, and we got him all cleaned up, but the vets could not cure his dry eye, and we were giving him drops 2 or 3 times a day of stuff. They wanted to do surgery on him, but it was really traumatic. They were gonna reroute his salivary gland into his eye, but then we'd have to feed him a special diet so his saliva wouldn't dissolve his eye. I mean, Jesus Christ, like what the fuck why would you do that? So we're like, no way are we gonna do that. And a little while after having him for probably like 6 months, I can't remember why, but I think I was maybe doing research on vitamin C, and I thought that maybe the chlorine in the tap water was causing his vitamin C to be deficient, because chlorine halides react with vitamin C. And so I started giving him filtered fridge water. Like we had one of those filters in like the refrigerator that dispenses water. So I started giving him water from there. Completely cleared up, not dry, but completely cleared up in, I think this was a long time ago now. I don't remember exactly how long, but it was very quickly. It was literally like his eye condition completely cured in just like 2 weeks. And we never had to give him eye drops again after that. Because animals that make their own vitamin C, they don't make a lot of it, but they can make enough to keep themselves alive. So chlorine has a lot more of a detrimental impact on them than it does on somebody like on an animal like us, who has evolved to actually persist very well without vitamin C. We literally discarded, like a lot of scientists talk about vitamin C. Humans not making vitamin C as if we accidentally or somehow lost it along the way. We didn't. We evolved it out of our biology, because not making our own vitamin C allows our physiology to lower the metabolic rate more efficiently when we encounter nutritional stress. So then that helps our body to hold on to and preserve nutrients for longer periods of time so that we can then survive better. Vitamin C, and conversely, vitamin C activates our metabolic pathways. But guess what happens? When you don't eat and your body releases stress hormones, guess what? It actively dumps vitamin C, because that's part of our survival strategy. When you encounter stress, like not eating breakfast, your body purposefully dumps vitamin C, because that helps us to survive that nutritional stress better. And so when you have destructive eating habits like dieting and low carbohydrate intake, not keeping your blood sugar up, exercising excessively, and I say this in dietary terms, but getting sunlight is a nutrient for our body. It literally directly drives cellular respiration in our cells. Is free energy. Like people talk about like humans don't photosynthesize. Well, no, we don't photosynthesize. We have a different pathway. It's called the mitochondrial electron transport chain. Sunlight interacts directly with an enzyme on the mitochondrial electron transport chain called cytochrome oxidase, and it literally spins this little molecular rotary motor and generates free energy. And obviously you have to have like the other substrates that help make that energy molecule, which is adenosine triphosphate, but that's very little nutrients. But anyway, so when you don't eat, your body literally dumps vitamin C, and that purposefully lowers your metabolic rate. And there's no way that you can be healthy without sufficient vitamin C. Like these are when you diet and you don't get sunshine and you work out too much, you're literally activating all of your body's survival stress pathways. And when those are activated, your body cannot regenerate tissue and have high metabolic rate. Ironically, like you might think that the condition like ADHD is a condition of a high metabolic rate, like I have too much energy to sit still. That absolutely is not what is going on. A lot of times people will think if they're really skinny and like very lean that they have a very high metabolic rate. That is absolutely not what's going on. When you have when you're restless and you have ADHD, when you wake up in the morning like really early to just conquer the day, that is not a high metabolic rate, it's high adrenaline. High adrenaline is what motivates that mindset, that way that your brain reacts to those things. It motivates you to act and to take action. And that in turn prevents you from relaxing and enjoying yourself. And and uh, uh, it's actually marked by a low metabolic rate. Like adrenaline occurs in response to a lowering of the metabolic rate, not a high metabolic rate. When you have a high, when you have a real, when you have, not real, that does, I don't know how to phrase that right. When your metabolic rate is truly raised in a healthy way, you actually feel more relaxed and more focused because your body produces plenty of energy, and energy actually helps your cells relax. When you're anxious and stressed out, you actually have less energy. So your body's producing stress hormones in order to try to compensate for that. And then that makes you feel motivated and anxious and restless because your body's trying to get you to get out there and go eat some peaches on a tree or, or something, find some dates. So we fundamentally misunderstand what's going on with the human body when we have these problems, and then that misunderstanding leads to decision making that ends up sustaining those states because it seems counterintuitive to what you would think. So yeah, so eat breakfast, avoid wheat, get plenty of sunshine, lots of sunshine every single day. Like if you find it difficult to get outside and get enough sunshine to reverse these conditions, you need to invent or create a reason to be outside. Starting a garden if you have space, even if you just have a patio and all you can do is like pots on your patio. Like doing a garden is a really great way to get outside. And not only that, because you can grow like really good. And also if you do that, don't use agrochemicals. They add to these problems so bad. Do regenerative. Look up, if you don't know what it is, watch YouTube videos on regenerative agriculture, regenerative gardening, no-dig gardening. They're fantastic. Charles Dowding is one of my favorites. Gardening is such a good activity to get you outside for the periods of time that are required to get you enough sun exposure. Can focus your attention, and you can also grow your own damn food, and really good food too. At that, you'd be surprised how many plants. Like I take a walk in my neighborhood that passes a wild mulberry tree. Mulberries are not endemic to Utah, but God knows how it got here probably. But there's literally a wild mulberry tree growing, and every day that I pass it, there is like 2 handfuls of ripened mulberries that I can get and eat, and it's literally like almost a meal. There's so much fruit on it, and from just one tree, and that's just from the branches that I can reach when I'm walking underneath it. It produces so much fruit for like 3 months out of the year. Gardening can actually produce a huge amount of really nutritious food for you. Sugary things like planting berries and like other sugary foods that are endemic to your region or can survive in your environment. Like that's a really great way. If you have a pet, just get out and walk them more, go on walks, go, take up sport, just go outside and read a book. You don't have to walk around. You do not have to be active. If you can just go outside and read a book if you can. On a related note, though, that's very relevant to this condition as well. Sometimes people feel anxiety when they get exposure to sunlight, and it's not the same reasons, but it is related to some of the nutrients involved here. Sunlight always activates mitochondrial respiration, and if you don't have sufficient antioxidants in your cells, then the activation of that oxidative respiration will cause oxidative damage to your cells. So if you go and you sit outside to get sunlight and you feel irritated, like you want to go back inside, that is a prime symptom of deficiencies of vitamin C and carotene that are our primary sunlight defensive antioxidants. And so you should always precede sunlight exposure with nutritious foods that contain nutrients like vitamin C and carotene, because that will make the experience really pleasant. Actually, you'll notice if you have like a huge salad or something high in carotene and some vitamin C beforehand, and then you go lay out in the sun, after about 20-30 minutes, you will start to feel like you're in a total place of Zen. It's one of the most profound relaxation tools that I've ever discovered in my life. This isn't going to work if you are smoking cigarettes, eating wheat, all those other things that you should not be doing to your body, right? Smoking cigarettes actually, for instance, also dumps vitamin C. this is not like, fail proof. Like, you need to do everything else I talk about in my book. But if you do, and you're taking care of your body, if you have vitamin C and keratin and you go lay out in the sun, when you'll be out there for like an hour, and you still won't want to go inside. You'll feel so calm and relaxed, and it's because the sun is stimulating so much energy production in your tissues from the sugar you've eaten, and being protected by the nutrients like vitamin C and keratin and all of that good stuff. So that can be very helpful too as well. And this is the same reason why like older people like always have their curtains drawn. Older people are so depleted in antioxidants that even like ambient light coming in from the outside is enough to cause them, like literally cause them oxidative stress in their skin, because they're so depleted of antioxidants. So that's an example of like why you have to have antioxidants when you go out in the sun, and you need sunshine exposure in order to raise the metabolic rate and inhibit stress hormones and torpor. So yeah, that's ADHD in a nutshell. If you take care of your body, eat plenty of sugar, get tons of sunshine, and avoid inflammatory foods, you don't have to deal with it. In fact, you can recover from ADHD so fast from these things, like 2 weeks. Like 2 weeks of doing this, of avoiding inflammatory foods, eating plenty of sugar, vitamin C, getting plenty of sunshine every single day. You will not have ADHD after 2 weeks for the rest of your life if you continue to do that. Even though I live in a place that has winter time and I don't get sunshine for like 4 months out of the year, I don't get a resurgence in the ADHD symptoms because of all the other work that I do to take care of my body as well. It really is not a difficult condition to recover from. Children that have ADHD, they do not need to be medicated. They need to get plenty of sunshine, plenty of sugar, stop eating wheat, polyunsaturated fats, and the getting enough sunshine. Like if kids are able to get sunshine, like, I mean, school starts really early here in the United States, but like the more sunshine that kids can get, and the more you keep their blood sugar up, like a lot of parents like won't feed their kids sugar. They think that sugar makes them crazy, because when you do, like as a parent, anecdotally, and sorry, no, I've been meaning to answer your question for like an hour now and I haven't. So I'll get to it. Parents anecdotally will give their children sugar, like candy too, not like something like fruit. They'll give them like candy or something, and the kids will start bouncing off the walls, and they think that it's the sugar that's doing that. It's not. When your child has gone for a long time without sugar or carbohydrate, but especially sugar, their stress hormones are really high because you haven't been giving them enough carbohydrate. Then when you give them a huge dose of carbohydrate, it's like if you had like a 64 Mustang and you lifted the back wheels off the ground and then floored the gas. And so the wheels are just like spinning, but they're spinning in the air. And as soon as you give the car sugar, the kid sugar, it's like dropping the back wheels and they hit the pavement and it takes off at lightning speed, right? That's what happens when you don't give kids enough sugar and then you give them sugar and they go crazy. It's because their stress hormones are high. Then kids always have a crash later. And the crash is the high energy state that I was talking about, where your cells produce enough energy, it actually induces relaxation. If you are a parent of young children that don't go to sleep at night, it's because you're not giving them dessert. If you give your children ice cream every night before they go to bed, they will stay asleep. It is exactly opposite of what you're thinking, because the problem is that you're not feeding them. And obviously, like, I don't advocate like junk food, like really. You should be giving your kids sugar mostly from fruit, apples, peaches, oranges, grapes. Whole fruit sources of sugar are very good. They're basically like, human children are basically evolved to live on fruit. You can give them so much fruit all the time and they'll just thrive. The fruit is so important for childhood growth and development. And that's where the primary sources of sugar should come from. And then on top of that, if you give them like a calorically dense source of sugar, like ice cream before bed, they'll stay asleep all night long and you'll get the bed, and then you'll get to sleep all night long, basically. It is the withholding of sugar that drives up adrenaline and other stress hormones. And then that causes sleeplessness and restlessness and ADHD and childhood ADHD, in addition to not having enough sunshine exposure, because then that elevates adrenaline chronically. So yeah, that's ADHD. Okay, questions. Yeah, okay, so I answer questions. If you guys want to talk about shit, start asking. 911, you said, Wonder Bunny, did I get everything that you maybe wanted to know about ADHD? Is there anything else? Is there anything you'd want to know? If you're still here. 911, what does it mean if you have to keep juice next to your bed because you wake up through the night needing sugar? Is it prediabetes? That's a good question. It might be pre-diabetes. It might not be. Fundamentally, if you can't stay asleep during the night, yes, one of the major problems behind that is an inability to store sufficient amounts of glycogen, to keep you fueled during sleep. Actually, my throat suddenly just got a little scratchy. I'm gonna get some water. Hang on real quick. I'll be back to finish that question. Oh, much better. Talking for an hour straight without stopping and no water. Okay. Yes. So if you have a hard time sleeping through the night, it can be glycogen storage problems. But there's also a gut pathogen called Clostridioides. It used to be called Clostridium difficile, but it's now called Clostridioides difficile. Clostridioides difficile and a lot of other opportunistic gut pathogens produce adrenaline analogs. A lot of bacteria, not just bacteria, a lot of pathogenic microbes feed on our sugars. In fact, one of the wrong but most prominent ideas to treat like candida infections is to go on a low carb diet, and that's not how to do it. It just makes it worse in the long run. It's not useful. A lot of microorganisms feed on our sugars and our proteins and our fats and lots of other things in our body, but specifically groups of microbes produce adrenaline analogs to release sugar from glycogen storage. And in between meals, especially at night, this can happen. One of the analogs is called tyramine. So adrenaline is made from dopamine, which is made from L-dopa, and then before that is made from tyrosine or phenylalanine. And tyrosine, a common microbial derivative of tyrosine that's very harmful for us, is called tyramine. And tyramine is actually an amino acid that is quite responsible for the harmful effects of food spoilage. We actually, even though there are a lot of problems with our food systems, like toxic agrochemicals and stuff like that, we actually have a really, really good food supply, generally speaking. Back in the Industrial Revolution, distribution of foods became a very lucrative business model. And so you had all these companies producing canned vegetables and fruits, and that fruit cocktail that you can buy, that's one of the oldest ones. But also like canned meats. Like they would literally they would produce a lot of meats that were stored in cans. And you'd open these up, and they would just be rotted through, just like smelly and slimy and gross. I don't remember what channel it was, but there was a documentary on YouTube I was watching about this, where during was it the Civil War? Was it the Civil War? I don't remember which war it was. Teddy Roosevelt, was he around? Was it Civil War or Revolutionary War? That's Civil War, right? Teddy Roosevelt. Not the no, he wasn't president at the time. I know it was Lincoln, but like Teddy Roosevelt was in a war before he was president. And there's this anecdotal report of him of seeing a soldier not wanting to eat his rations, his meat rations. and Teddy goes over and kind of scolds him, you know, because he's this like, you know, idiot of a dude. And the soldier says like the rations like are disgusting, and so Teddy grabs his rations and tries to eat it himself, and it was so gross that even Teddy Roosevelt couldn't stomach it. Tyramine is one of those products of microbial spoilage that makes spoilage harmful and also unpalatable. But it can be produced in our gut too from the same bacteria that spoil meat on the grocery store shelf or in cans, like, you know, used to happen a lot more often. Tyramine can be made in our gut from pathogenic microorganisms. And Clostridium difficile is a really common virulent pathogen that most people have. And its severity and effect on your physiology is dependent on the state of your gut microbiome and immune system. A lot of people have C. difficile and don't even know it because its effects are so subtle because of the strength of your commensal microbiome and your immune system that protect us from it. In fact, though, the immune system is not capable of protecting us from C. difficile ultimately. The primary defense comes from a healthy microbiome. So as you start to get older or you start to develop metabolic disease and you have prominent gut dysbiosis, you'll then start to present with more obvious symptoms of these opportunistic pathogens that live in your gastrointestinal system. And it's microbes like these two, which are why you sometimes see benefits from doing incorrect and inappropriate things like using chronic antibiotics. Antibiotics can suppress active C. difficile, but they don't do anything about the spores. And the more you use antibiotics and wipe out the commensal microbiome, the less resistance you have to really dangerous pathogens like C. difficile. In fact, in the course of the research that I've been doing for the last several years on disease-causing organisms, I got really fed up with struggling with gum disease, and I was just going to take antibiotics and be done with it because I was getting really fed up with it. And one of the antibiotics I tried to do that with was clindamycin. And clindamycin instead revealed a really bad C. difficile infection in me. It was so bad that I almost went to the hospital, but I thankfully figured out that I could use things like dietary tannin to actually restrain it. And this is some of the stuff that's going to be in my upcoming update. It got so bad I could feel it moving into my liver. C. difficile causes death by like moving into your liver and gallbladder. And I could feel that happening. And then then that's how I discovered that tannin has really important health benefits that are going to be talked about a lot in my book. So very often when you wake at night, it can be that you're not storing enough glycogen, but if you've eaten enough sugar and carbohydrate during the day, it's more likely that it is a pathogen like Clostridioides difficile releasing adrenaline analogs and which are waking you up. Because like Clostridioides difficile, for instance, very specifically feeds on an intermediate of the polyol pathway, which is where glucose and fructose are interconverted between each other. And also I think involves like mannose and other sugars like that. The intermediate is called sorbitol, and sorbitol is very often actually used as an artificial sweetener as well. Clostridioides thrives on sorbitol, and it stimulates adrenaline and adrenaline analogs in our body so that our body will release glucose, because guess what? A lot of people also don't fucking know this either. And when I say people, I don't mean obviously like normal people. I mean like doctors and scientists, like even research and people that are supposed to know these things don't know these things. Most glucose that is taken up by every cell in your body is first converted to fructose before it's actually used in pathways. Even when cells need to use glucose, they will still first convert it to fructose and then convert it back into glucose. Our body's really weird that way. I think that though is to probably meant to help sustain fructose pools, because fructose is so important for the body. But anyway, an intermediate in the polyol pathway is sorbitol, and Clostridium difficile loves sorbitol. So it forces adrenaline response in the body during periods it does not have access to carbohydrate, such as when you're asleep, in order to stimulate massive release of glucose from glycogen storage, so that it can then farm the sorbitol that occurs during the interconversion of glucose to fructose. And yes, this is very complicated. It's one of the Clostridium difficile is so difficult to cure and treat, and it's responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths every year by mostly older and immunocompromised people. This is why it's so important to maintain a healthy microbiome, not to just like wipe them out with antibiotics. You have to cultivate a thriving commensal microbiome in your gut in order to prevent those things. These pathogens also, yes, do contribute to diabetes as well. Diabetes is marked by chronically elevated adrenaline. And because adrenaline releases glucose from glycogen storage, it causes prominent chronic high elevated blood sugar. There's a lot of other things that go into that, though. Actually, my update too. I've uncovered very specific pathways for diabetes and stuff that's going to be in my update. And it's way too much to explain here. But basically, if you follow a lot of the advice that's in my book, like for instance, using pectin as a source of short chain fat, microbial short chain fatty acid production, like I talk about in my book, that is really, really effective in maintaining a healthy gut environment. In fact, the more research that I've done on it, the more it's always reliable. It's so reliable. If you supplement pectin with and also in my earlier book I mentioned apple pectin, but it doesn't even have to be apple pectin. It can be any pectin. Pectin can only be metabolized into short chain fatty acids, and that helps to acidify the gastrointestinal system to normalize the pH. And it has real systemic benefits to your health. Also, eating lots of fruit, things high in anthocyanin and tannin, those also really help with that kind of stuff. There's nothing wrong with keeping juice next to your bed, but I would prefer that you keep like an apple, or you can have an apple before bed, for instance. So like the difference between juice and an apple, if you have a whole apple before you go to bed, the apple has a bunch of shit in it. It has fructose, it has anthocyanins, it has pectin, tons of pectin, actually. It's one of the reasons, I mentioned this in my book, the pectin in apples, which converts into short chain fatty acids, primarily acetic acid, is the reason why, for the saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Like when you have apples, it has so many nutrients that support a healthy gut microbiome. I, to this day, have not found a food that's more effective at it. So an apple before bed can help you sleep better through the night than juice. But you can have juice too. I would suggest that you add some pectin to that juice, though, so that it's not just sugar, that you also have the pectin in there to promote commensal microbes. One of the other problems, which is directly related to what I just talked about with stuff like that, is that stress hormones like adrenaline are detoxified through the gut, through feces, through both the sulfation and that escaped my brain. What is that word? Hey, Mike. Hang on. I forgot a word that I need real quick. Butyric acid. What's the other detoxification pathway? Glucuric detox. Oh, calcium deglucarate. Glucuronic. It came to my brain. Glucuronic acid and sulfation are pathways that detoxify hormones and xenobiotics and polyunsaturated fats too out of the body. And there's a lot of microbes too that actually will metabolize the glucuronic acid that is attached to things like adrenaline during the night, and that will cause recirculation of adrenaline, so it can actually amplify itself. And people take a supplement called calcium D-glucarate for that, but apples actually are really high in glucuric acid. So when you when you eat an apple, you're also promoting detoxification pathways through the gut, and that can also help you sleep as well. So yeah, Mike, so apple jelly or jam. Yeah. Oh, actually, and also, sorry for all caps. I don't care about caps. I don't understand streamers that get so mad about caps. I got auto blocked from a streamer the other day because I had too many caps, and I was like, wasn't that so like 2016 to be anti-cap use? And you should scream about apple jelly. So apple butter. Oh, apple butter is the best. It's the best of all of them. You think you like applesauce or, other apple products? Apple butter is just fucking amazing. It's so good. Yes, Mike, those work great because they're actually better than apple juice because they contain more having the whole apple in there makes it contain the glucuric acid. It might not have the anthocyanins because of the skin removal, but that's okay. That's not, anthocyanins are really important, but you can get those generally from other foods. When you have applesauce or apple jelly or apple butter, or apple pie or apple turnover, like that's the thing. Like, I advocate for like hedonistic eating. Like, we don't have to be doing, I hear people making like stewed apples where they just like cook down apples and eat them plain. Like put butter in there, put cinnamon in there, like a little bit of pinch of salt, like make it good. You can have apple pie. Apple pie takes a long time though. So I like doing like apple pastry. Like I'll make and guess what, you guys, making pastry dough is actually really easy. A lot of you think that I'm a good cook because I put up nice, pretty photos of recipes that I make. I'm actually not very good at cooking. About half of my stuff turns out amazing, and the other half is just like it's edible. It doesn't, And I don't like cooking for the act of cooking. I like cooking because I like eating good food, and so I cook to eat well. And so I love apple pie, but it sometimes is a lot of work to make a whole pie. So instead, I'll just make I'll make a pastry, and I'll make some pastry dough because it's like the same thing as making a pie crust. You still got to do it, but you roll it out, and then I just layer sliced apples across the top of it, in melted butter with cinnamon and sugar, and just bake it. And it's like like apple tart, like it's so good, and it takes like half an hour, 45 minutes. It's so worth the time. But yeah, so you can buy apple butter, applesauce, so it's really good. And so yeah, and if you have blood sugar problems at night, yeah, you can keep juice by your bed. But use pectin. Pectin is really, really useful for that kind of stuff. So, Mike, is the browning of apples in apple cider a concern? Mycotoxins? No. I don't know. Those aren't mycotoxins. Mycotoxins aren't mycotoxins a fungal yeast product. Browning of apples is a Maillard reaction, and it's just caramelization of the sugars. It's actually not even just fine. The products of the Maillard reaction are actually probably good for us. The Maillard reaction is a combination of proteins and sugars, and whenever you get that in food, it breaks down both the sugar and the protein, and then forms glycoproteins that are really easy to digest and absorb. It's one of the reasons why barbecue tastes so fucking good. Like when you grill like a juicy chicken or a steak, the sugars, and this is what's also really funny. When people do low carb diets, like people don't understand that there's actually a substantial amount of sugar in meat. Like it's one of the reasons why meat tastes yummy. If you let meat spoil on the counter and all the microbes in it eat up all the sugars that are in the meat, then it doesn't taste good anymore. And that's really a low carb diet if you eat rotten meat. There's actually a lot of sugar in meat. So when you like grill meat and it caramelizes, that causes that Maillard reaction, those products of sugar and protein combinations are so delicious because they're also really easy to digest and also really good for us. And so, yeah, so then the browning of apples is just is just the discoloration from the high amount of sugar that's in there in the Maillard reaction. So you don't have to worry about it. If you leave an apple out and it gets a little brown, you should continue eating it. You don't have to avoid it. Can I elaborate on fructose pools or fructose homeostasis? Yeah. So fructose is one of, if not the most important sugar in our body. Glucose is the most abundant, but fructose is the most metabolically active. And this is actually also one of the reasons for the confusion behind a lot of the misinformation and misunderstanding on fructose, with a great majority of, like, you know, say doctors and people mistaking fructose as a harmful nutrient. The great majority of glucose that is taken up by cells is always first converted to fructose, even when the cell needs to use glucose. Which is seems very strange and paradoxical, right? Like, why would our body go through that extra energy expenditure to do that when it already has, like, glucose, for instance? It could also be a way for the body to rigidly structure molecules to make sure that they are appropriately formed. You know, absent their oxidation or other things like that interfere with those functions. But I think it's primarily a way to maintain fructose pools, because fructose is so important, is one of the most important. For instance, studies show that fructose, not glucose, more rapidly replenishes glycogen storage, even though glycogen is made from glucose, because ingested glucose first has to be converted to fructose, then to glucose for glycogen storage. If you eat fructose, that's where you get to skip the step, because if you eat fructose, you don't have to first convert that glucose into fructose and then back into glucose again. The body is really weird. So fructose itself more rapidly replenishes glycogen, even though glycogen is made out of glucose, because the body is going to convert that glucose into fructose anyway. Sugars, when they're ingested and processed by the body, are also phosphorylated. So you get like fructose 1 phosphate or fructose 6 phosphate or glucose 1 phosphate, et cetera, et cetera. And those participate as cofactors in enzymatic pathways or conjugates, and and fructose is involved in those. Like also, for instance, in diabetes, for instance, like, a lot of people don't know or understand that fructose, because our body primarily uses fructose and most glucose that's taken up by cells is converted to fructose, fructose assists the body in using glucose. And one of the problems with diabetes, actually, ironically, is fructose deficiency, because the body can't use glucose without fructose, because fructose is primarily the active sugar in the pathways that run these things, like the citric acid pathway, and and the respiratory chain and stuff like that. Also, sugars are used to create glycoproteins, and there's, I don't know, like, I'm going to hyperbolically say there's millions of them, even though there's not. There's so many glycoproteins in our body. Glycoproteins are glucose, sugar, and protein combined together in metabolic functions, because protein needs to be controlled and specified, and sugar helps to do that. And for instance, one very important set of glycoproteins are mucin proteins that make up mucus. Mucus on mucosal tissues in your mouth, in your esophagus, in your stomach, in your intestinal systems, in your sinuses, and your lungs, and your urethra, and your vagina, and your epididymis, which is in the testes, your prostate, are all mucosal tissues. And they use mucus to protect those tissues from opportunistic colonization by parasites and bacteria and fungi. And those are glycoproteins. So they are dependent on sugar. And one of the most detrimental ill health effects of dieting, especially low carbohydrate, is impairment of glycoprotein production. It's one of the reasons why dieting behaviors induces disease primarily, is because it impairs the first primary defensive mechanism we have against microbes, pathogenic microbes, which are glycoproteins. And glycoproteins also actually mucus. They not only protect us from pathogenic ones, they also cultivate commensal microbes actually. So when you have sugar deficiency, you don't eat enough sugar, don't eat enough carbohydrate, you actually cannot make enough glycoproteins to produce properly defensive mucus. Your mucus then becomes ineffective, and then you become colonized by opportunistic pathogenic microbes from kissing or sneezing or food contamination and unwashed hands, et cetera, et cetera. Fructose is, again, the central sugar in the glycoprotein chain. A lot of glycoproteins are made from glucose, fructose, mannose, as well as galactose. And although not very many are made out of galactose. And fructose is at the center of all of those. Again, even if you consume starch and glucose, it's when it's picked up by cells, even when it's being made to make glucose glycoproteins, it's first converted into fructose. So fructose pools are the most important resource in terms of carbohydrate at a cellular level in the body. I think, and because it's the most metabolically active, it doesn't require insulin. Like glucose requires insulin, right, to be taken up into cells, but fructose does not. And that's why fructose is the most metabolically active sugar. So it's also the most important. So I think the body does that probably to first make sure there's plenty of fructose for available pathways, and then it will use what fructose is available either from the diet or from endogenous localized synthesis to then make the other sugars that it does, like glucose or mannose, etc. There's also another sugar called fucose, not to be confused with fructose. And fucose is also another very important glycosylating sugar. Excuse me. You wonder if the glycolysis conversion to fructose has to do with preventing insulin stimulation. No, I'm not preventing. It would actually promote insulin. Do you mean insulin synthesis or function? Fructose promotes both. Fructose promotes insulin synthesis, so does sodium actually, as well as insulin uptake into cells. So does sodium. Both fructose and sodium do that. So it wouldn't. So fructose doesn't prevent it; it actually promotes it. Oh, but by the way, though, like most studies on diabetes will not demonstrate that, because most studies on diabetes don't actually trace fructose where it goes during, and I'm going to reveal this in my book update, but I'll tell you guys now. I think I'm very, very confident that a condition called fructose malabsorption accompanies and causes diabetes. Most studies on diabetes in humans don't actually trace the fructose. Fructose malabsorption is a prominent metabolic problem, and when you have fructose malabsorption, it causes and presents with most of the symptoms of diabetes. It causes gastrointestinal gut dysbiosis and excessive circulating glucose, because cells need fructose in order to take up glucose. And fructose malabsorption actually underlies diabetes in both concert and opposition to theories on fructose contributing to diabetes. Because excessive fructose intake can cause diabetes, but because it's not being absorbed, not because it's being absorbed. And so that also then antagonizes the idea of fructose being a causative agent of diabetes rather than the factors that impair fructose malabsorption, because fructose is required for our body to use glucose. And fructose malabsorption actually underlies diabetes for the reason of impairing fructose uptake, actually. And that has to actually a lot to do with pH and pneumonia and stuff like that. And my upcoming update, which I promise I'm working on, is going to talk about that actually. So, So starch and fructose restriction doesn't mean fructose is absent from metabolism, just from digestion. Yes, exactly. Um, the reason why like fructose restriction would have any beneficial effects on your digestion and metabolic health is because you're avoiding the malabsorption that would then disturb the gut microbiome rather than restoring the normal metabolism of fructose, which is actually really dependent on pectin. I mean, that's the secret. I wasn't going to say, but I will say it is like pectin because so actually, okay, so the chain of events that happens during diabetes is that you get colonized by ammonia producing microbes. Ammonia destabilizes the pH of the intestinal system, and that then impairs the absorption of fructose, sodium, chloride, silicon, molybdenum, water. I mean, it's just fucking nuts. Like ammonia disturbs so much. And if you have pectin in your diet, what happens is microbes produce short chain fatty acids from pectin that acidifies the gut and acidifies ammonia and stops its inhibitory effect on those nutrients. And so like the difference and this is also why there's a discrepancy between in studies on fructose between, say, for instance, high fructose corn syrup and fruit, which is high in fructose. I mean, you can get as much or more fructose from fruit than you can from high fructose corn syrup. Fruit is really, really high in fructose, but it doesn't cause diabetes. And the reason is because all of the nutrients in fruit, including pectin, promotes active short chain fatty acid synthesis in the gut from our commensal microbes, which cannot happen from something, say, like a refined source of fructose, like high fructose corn syrup. But the intervening factor is also colonization by ammonia producing microbes. So you can get people who are not colonized by ammonia producing microbes who can handle like high fructose corn syrup just fine, and then other people who can't, that get diabetes from it, and having and also because like there's also connections with polyunsaturated fats, because fats disturb the gut microbiome and destabilize sugar metabolism as well. And then there's also microbes, like I talk about in my book, that are the cause of autism, Streptomyces bacteria, that actually block biotin, which impairs ammonia metabolism once ammonia is in your body. Ammonia, when it's in our body, is detoxified through both urea and also the synthesis of glutamine, which is actually the most abundant and most used amino acid in the body and is an important energy source for many tissues and pathways in the body, like the brain and the immune system. And so conditions like autism, which are caused by Streptomyces bacteria, cause autism by impairing ammonia metabolism, because because glutamine is required, so important for growth as well as immune function, which then sustains gut dysbiosis. And so it's ammonia mediates both diabetes and autism, and so a diet that's like low in fruit and low in pectin is also, as well as exposure to toxic agrochemicals that eliminate those bacteria that we need to produce the short chain fatty acids, which would normally acidify ammonia, cause those issues. Yeah. So those diets, that like a food map diet and stuff, like they just misunderstand what's actually happening, which underlies ammonia. There's other things too, though. Actually, like there's a really complex thing with silicon that I discussed in my update that I just can't get into now. It's too much. But it's really neat. It's really, really cool. It's actually probably one of the neatest discoveries I've made, I think. So it's really simple, but it's really cool. So Jamal, do I find blood work or tests useful to identify specific issues or periodic checkups? Or I definitely do not find gut stool analysis helpful. Stool analysis doesn't tell us anything we don't already know. I mean, every health problem you have originates in the gut. So you will if you have health problems, you will never ever find useful information from a stool analysis. Really. You can tell some things from stool analysis. Like if you have fatty stools, then that indicates poor bile function, which again, like I talk about in my book, bile is promoted by short chain fatty acids, which result from commensal microbes feeding on indigestible carbohydrate like pectin, as well as sugar and vitamin C. I mean, bile is dependent on sugar and vitamin C. So like fatty stools would like indicate poor bile function, but otherwise there's nothing else about. Basically, like very usually you can just kind of ignore whatever your butt is doing. Like it's none of it is helpful. I once was like helping somebody who did that stupid like olive oil cleanse where you eat like a shit ton of olive oil, and then they told me that their stool had all these green stuff in it, and I was like, the color of olive oil is green, like you're just seeing the olive oil passing all the way through you, like, and also that much fat, like when your bile isn't working properly, bile functions in part by also protecting our gut microbiome from the antibiotic properties of fat. So, and this is actually a very important point that I missed in earlier versions of my book. If fat, but I do mention this too, like you can use fat as an antibiotic. So you can do like like using coconut oil as a swish in your mouth is really effective at helping to repair tooth decay, because the fatty when your salivary enzymes release those fatty acids from coconut oil, and those are antibiotic, they can detoxify small cavities in your teeth, which can then help your teeth to regenerate. And yes, teeth can regenerate small cavities. They can't regenerate like big damage, but small cavities they can. And fats are antibiotic to bacteria. So one of the primary functions of bile, besides promoting fat absorption, is also to protect your commensal microbiome from destruction by dietary fat. And that is also one of the reasons why studies on high dietary fat show adverse health effects, is because you can consume so much fat that your bile cannot overcome its or in ratio can't actually like stop or emulsify the fat. That's what bile does, is emulsify the fat, and protect your microbiome. And the negative health effects of a high fat diet come primarily just from wiping out your commensal microbes, which then interferes with their production of short chain fatty acids and B vitamins and other important things that they do. So bile function can be very useful. If you have fatty stools, that means you're not producing bile, and you need to have tons more fruit, carbohydrate, and vitamin C in your diet in order to get those get that bile working again, as well as foods high in anthocyanin, and anthocyanin participates in bile function as well. So but other blood work and other tests, Jamal, excuse me, are they can sometimes kind of be helpful. Like vitamin D levels are helpful to know, but the problem with test results is that most doctors don't know how to do anything with them anyway. Literally, like, what do doctors really do? The doctors are really good at surgery and really good at prescribing meds. They're not good at curing any metabolic disease. I mean, literally, you go to any doctor, not a single doctor on this planet can cure diabetes or autism or insomnia or erectile dysfunction. They can give you meds that can treat the symptoms, but they can't cure any of those. And so when you get tests, they don't really do anything useful, because the people that are interpreting those tests don't even know what they mean. But when you work with someone like me, like knowing, but usually I can just tell by what symptoms you have if you're vitamin D deficient, for instance. Like vitamin D promotes immunity, promotes good sleep, promotes weight loss, And so if you're presenting with weight gain and immune dysfunction and bad sleep, then usually you're vitamin D deficient, even if you are getting sunshine, because there's so many intricate pathways that are involved in vitamin D synthesis. So I don't ever use blood work when I work with people, but sometimes it can be helpful just to let you know what's going on. But usually what results from that is I'm working with somebody actually just now that signed up for coaching who I was coaching a long time ago and had a long history of testosterone deficiency. And, his doctor responded to that by prescribing testosterone supplements. But guess what? That doesn't fix testosterone deficiency. And it causes, when you have testosterone deficiency and you supplement testosterone, it makes your balls shrink up even smaller. Because a lot of people, even doctors, don't know that testosterone aromatizes into estrogen in a low metabolic body. When you have a low metabolic rate, taking testosterone causes it to aromatize into estrogen. If you're transgender, for instance, if you're a transgender male and you're taking testosterone, but you have a bad diet and low metabolic rate, that testosterone you're taking is just aromatizing into estrogen. So you're actually just supplementing more estrogen, even though if you might have some benefits, obvious effects from the testosterone, but your transition is very slow because your body is actually aromatizing all that testosterone back into estrogen. And doctors don't know this stuff, so test results don't really often have much use, right? Because the people that are reading them don't know what they're doing. So they can be helpful sometimes. But sorry, that was sort of just like kind of a negative answer. The positive, actionable answer is that symptoms are way more useful in determining action than test results, really. Unless you're like really having bad health problems, and you need to figure out, like, a lot of health problems are caused by parasites, and no one tests for those, and even tests for them don't really turn up anything. A really common STD actually is called trichomonas, and it's a parasite that's transmitted from sexual activity. And so, for instance, like if you're a woman and you're getting like lots of urinary tract infection, or like if you have a partner that's getting lots of urinary tract infections, you guys have trichomonas. Like trichomonas actually down regulates localized immune response. You can suppositories that are meant to treat urinary tract infections and yeast infections work very well, actually, though. But like, so that can treat that. But like, doctors don't ever test for trichomonas nowadays unless you present with really obvious trichomoniasis. They will not test you for trichomonas, even though it is the most non-viral, the most commonly non-viral sexually transmitted disease. So. Yeah, so this is my work, is to to educate everybody about this stuff. Regarding ammonia mishandling, is nitric oxide or dietary nitrate contribute to this? I don't know, Mike. Probably not directly. If anything, I would say the ammonia impairs metabolism of nitric oxide in nitrate. Nitric oxide rapidly oxidizes into nitrate and nitrite and then nitrate. And our body has to continually reduce and maintain nitric oxide in its native state to avoid nitrosative stress. And ammonia probably interferes with that pathway rather than the other way around, probably. Maybe I don't have a specific answer for that one because I've not looked into that directly. It could very well nitrate, because nitrate when you can't metabolize nitrate. I was watching this YouTube interview, and there was somebody on there talking about using poppers. Because poppers, for those of you that don't know, poppers is a kind of a common recreational drug, more used around in gay communities. But poppers used to be a mainstream, widespread drug of abuse. They're called poppers because they were invented back in the Victorian age, when people had handkerchiefs and wore dresses every day and hats, and they were an antidote for angina. And if you don't know what angina is this constriction of the arteries in your chest and blood vessels in your chest. And it feels like a heart attack, but it's not a heart attack. But it is a cardiovascular problem, and it's apparently very painful. And nitrate and nitrite can convert into nitric oxide. And so they produced, I think it's called amyl nitrate, and they were made in little glass spheres as a distribution mechanism because it's a gas. You can't you can't really, well, you can make it into a liquid, but actually I guess it was a liquid and a gas. But they didn't have like pills back then. I mean like capsules like we have nowadays, like gel capsules. So they manufactured them in glass spheres, and you would and they're called poppers because you would put some of the glass spheres into a handkerchief and then crush them like next to your chest and then inhale the fumes that came off of that. And those fumes were potent nitrite. And that nitrite would then rapidly convert into nitric oxide and dilate your blood vessels in your chest, and thereby relieving you of the spasm that was causing it. So, though, nitric oxide can cause also a temporary sense of euphoria because of the intense dilation of blood flow and blood vessels, which then increases delivery of oxygen to your brain, but also because it inhibits mitochondrial respiration, which inhibits CO2 output, because CO2 also counterbalances oxygen. So if you temporarily inhibit CO2, you increase the delivery of oxygen temporarily, but then also long term, that actually impairs the delivery of oxygen long term because we have to have CO2 to actually promote oxygen delivery. So abusing poppers as a recreational drug was very popular in the 60s and 70s because nitrates were available without a prescription, and it was very commonly actually a young person's drug. A survey done of high school students in the 70s put the use of poppers recreationally at like 11% of high schoolers had tried poppers. Then when children of the 60s and 70s grew up and disco and club scenes started to evolve, poppers migrated with them into the club scenes. But whereas a lot of the heterosexual community, certainly gay people were not immune to this, but drugs started morphing into heroin and cocaine instead of poppers. But for some reason, gay people kept poppers around and kept using poppers because they were really popular to use during sex. And so poppers became continued to be used in the gay community, whereas the heterosexual community kind of abandoned them and went on to just to use like heroin and cocaine and other drugs like that. The kind of nitrate poppers that were around, though, were really, really toxic and could really, really cause health problems. So they got outlawed, but other poppers are still around. This was a really long tangent from your question, Mike. Hi, Melinda. Sorry. But anyway, but it's fun. Like, I just love the idea of like Victorian women like fainting and crushing, little glass balls and a handkerchief. It's so Edwardian, Victorian, steampunk kind of medicine. But anyway, so abuse. So I was watching this YouTube interview, and they were talking about poppers, and a lot of people people that use poppers do it because they think that it's mostly harmless, and it's not. It's very, very, very toxic for your immune system. I talk about this in my book that the dysfunction of nitric oxide regulation and the elevation of nitrite and nitrate in the body is the cause of HIV and AIDS, actually. And it's because also that nitrate and nitrate come from very many sources. It comes in our own body. When you start to lose the ability to recycle nitric oxide, you build up nitrate and nitrate. And in excess, nitrate and nitrite impair mitochondrial respiration as well as the heme based peroxidases that fuel the immune system. When immune cells attack pathogens like viruses, like HIV, and Ray Peat, talked about how like a lot of the research that underlied HIV didn't make a lot of sense and wasn't really very good or conclusive. It's because it was missing the in the factors of nitrate abuse or exposure and the role of heme peroxidases in the immune response. And so when people talk about immune cells all the time, like T cells, and other white cells and like leukocytes, it's not really important what cell it is. That's not really that important. The pathway that they use to kill the microbes is, and the peroxidase oxidation pathway with hypohalous acids that are produced by those cells are important. And those are made by heme enzymes. And so is cytochrome oxidase, our primary respiratory enzyme. And those are inhibited by toxic substances like carbon monoxide, which is why when you get carbon monoxide poisoning, like you just die like really fast, right? Like we see that all the time when people's heating equipment, or they bring like a barbecue inside their house stupidly to warm it up, and the whole family's dead from carbon monoxide poisoning. The reason that happens is because carbon monoxide is one of the most powerful inhibitors of heme. And hydrogen sulfide is also really toxic. But nitrates and nitrites are also really toxic to heme proteins and heme-based enzymes. So poppers give you a high in part because they temporarily and lightly inhibit the respiratory enzyme, which causes a temporary hypoxic feeling of euphoria. But the influx of excessive nitrite also can induce nitric oxide production to dilate your blood vessels as well. But this is the same reason why people take pre-workout. Like when you go and you do pre-workout and you take like supplements high in citrulline or other compounds, or also similarly erectile dysfunction medications. And this is a lot. This is really complicated, but I cover all of this in my book. In the relevant chapters. And so like the way that erectile dysfunction medications work is they inhibit the enzyme that would normally regulate nitric oxide, which causes it to be elevated. But that also causes the increased synthesis of nitrite and nitrate. And because nitrite and nitrate inhibit heme and respiratory enzymes, people that use erectile dysfunctions age far more rapidly. Like you can see old men that start using erectile dysfunction medications, their aging accelerates noticeably. And it's because of the inhibitory effect of nitrate and nitrate on respiratory enzymes. But those also inhibit immune enzymes that are made by immune cells in order to attack viruses like HIV. So anyway, this was a really, really long tangent about saying how like, so dietary nitrate, if it is very excessive, could inhibit ammonia detoxification pathways by inhibiting respiration pathways. But you'd likely have to like also be being exposed to like really large sources of it through agricultural contamination or drug abuse or like severe vitamin C deficiency, because vitamin C helps to regulate nitric oxide. So yeah, that was a really long tangent for that. Oh yeah, so Jamal, sorry. 30 minutes later, Jamal, stool analysis. Labs can identify specific bacteria in your microbiome, but then what do you do about that, right? I mean, like that's again, like, what do you do with the test results? It doesn't really matter to know what bacteria are in your stool. You can know that they're there by your symptoms. If you have gut pains, bloating, indigestion, IBS, Crohn's, autism, diabetes, hair loss, you are colonized by opportunistic, and not just bacteria. You're colonized by opportunistic parasites, viruses, bacteria, and fungi. They're all trying to eat us, all of them. And treating, and you should treat them, and you need to treat them, and it doesn't really matter which ones they are, because when you're a healthy human, you have a limited set of commensal microbes that inhabit your gut. And then you achieve that through the kind of diet like my book talks about: high fruit, pectin, sodium acetate, sodium citrate, sun exposure, all those strategies, vitamin K, carotenes. Again, that regulates your microbiome, whereas a test doesn't necessarily do that. And then if you do, and then when you get a test, like a doctor will say like, oh, like, you can take a probiotics don't really work. As anyone who's like, taking probiotics for years and still has health problems can still tell you that. So yeah. So, I mean, it can be interesting to know what test results are, but I haven't been able to use anyone's test results at any time in treating them, and neither have they, and neither have their doctors. And then that's why people come to me, is because their doctors are not able to help them. And the reason their doctors are not able to help them is because they don't actually know what those test results mean or what to do about them other than just write you a prescription for some pharmaceutical that you then are dependent on for months and years and decades. So yeah. Mike, you've seen a Head and Shoulders commercial that claims dandruff is caused by oleic acid eating fungi. Oh, well, I mean, that's actually not necessarily wrong. Dandruff is caused by fungi. Any kind of skin conditions usually are caused by yeast and fungi in the skin, and but a lot of it, they might not. When also to say that something eats oleic acid, there's no organism on the planet only eats one thing, right? And our body makes oleic acid, and our body makes oleic acid in response to pathogenic colonization as well. Fatty acids inhibit microorganisms very often, and usually when you have dandruff, or you have skin like weirdness like psoriasis and things like that, your skin is colonized by bacteria that are primarily feeding on elevated glucose circulation, because excess sugar to the skin provides them with nutrient, and then they can set up there. So that's why I like addressing and like a lot of people, like in my chapter on diabetes, I talk about how there are gestational stages for diseases that doctors are not equipped to, nor do they actively diagnose. One of the exceptions, though, actually nowadays is diabetes, where they will now say that you have pre-diabetes. And that's what medicine should be. Like in medicine, you should be able to identify diseases well before they mature. But they don't and can't, because most of the medical profession is just supplied by like pharmaceutical companies that their only aim is to give you a prescription. So if you don't have full-blown diabetes, a prescription for metformin or whatever, the medicines you take for diabetes aren't going to be relevant, and there's nothing to sell you, So there's no point in treating the gestational stage of the disease, because it won't make them money. Because it'll cure you. So like when you get like dandruff or other skin conditions, or in certain stages of gut dysbiosis and metabolic disease are diabetes. But and a lot more people are developing diabetes that are even aware of it, because they might be skinny, or because you're not totally wiped out at the end of every day, but you might have a little dandruff. But like those are related symptoms. It's just that diabetes is the more severe, advanced case of those things, and medicine needs to get better at identifying and diagnosing and stopping disease before it starts. But they can't, also because most medicine is informed by studies that are incorrect, such as thinking that fructose is bad for you, right? Because we need fructose to metabolize glucose. So, and most of the medical profession thinks that serotonin deficiency causes depression, which it absolutely does not. And so they can't even begin to start to evaluate and diagnose and resolve the gestational stages of metabolic diseases, because they're not even looking in the right direction yet. So, but hopefully that's what my work does, and continues the work of Ray Peat, so that we can really actually cure diseases, not just treat symptoms. Does sunshine age your skin faster when you're outside several hours a day? The answer is yes and no. The answer is supposed to be no, Jamal. Oh, and I remember you actually do get a lot of sunshine. Sun will not age your skin as long as the skin is replete in antioxidants. We need ample amounts of dietary vitamin C and keratin in the skin. The skin, funny enough, is also a reservoir for sodium. And that's actually discussed very often in research or by doctors as if it's like a buffer for sodium, but it's a storage site for sodium. Sodium is so important. Like I mentioned earlier in the stream, one of the purposes of adrenaline release. I've been talking for too long now. I need to cough too. Oh. One of the purposes of adrenaline release is to potentiate the effect of sodium on cells in driving cellular metabolism. And sodium, and there's so many transport pathways in our body that are dependent on sodium. Actually, vitamin C for one, vitamin C transport pathways are dependent on sodium. So is iodine. What else? Well, and water. Sodium helps to manage water, actually. So, and ironically, when you have like edema and water retention, you actually are low in sodium, because the absence of sodium in your body prevents your cells from actually managing water. So water then floods into tissues uncontrolled, and then you get edema and elephantitis and bloating and stuff like that, because of the blockage of sodium uptake into the body. But if you restore that through these kind of dietary strategies, and you take sodium, like I've been recommending sodium acetate for like years and years and years. One of the reasons that it helps to promote health is because of the elevation in sodium helps to reinvigorate skin and empower skin, because skin is highly, highly dependent on sodium. So Jamal, if you're if you are getting sunshine every day, you should always have plenty of vitamin C and dietary keratin early in the day before you get sunshine. And then that will promote healthy sun exposure. And oppositely, so like molecularly, like the way that keratin, and like a lot of people in our communities, because of stuff that Ray said, entirely misunderstand keratin and keratin's function. Ray was not wrong about the things he said. The application of that knowledge is wrong. So keratin acts as an antioxidant, but keratin also very specifically acts as a absorber of harmful UV light. Not just UV, the whole cold spectrum of sunlight. And I'm not talking about cold as in heat temperature. I'm talking about color. So the wavelengths of light from green to ultraviolet vibrate at a higher resonance, higher frequency. And that means that they can more powerfully is energize the right word? My brain's starting to die. Higher wavelengths of sunlight more strongly irradiate your tissues, or your DNA and stuff like that. So keratin, the skin is one of the places in the body highest in keratin, actually. And it's because keratin absorbs those high frequency wavelengths of light. And so if you don't have them when you're exposed to sunlight, those wavelengths of light then irradiate your DNA and other tissues in your body, and cause more advanced aging and oxidative stress. So you can get tons of sunshine outside, and you should. And as long as you are replete with vitamin C and keratin every day, then that will protect your skin from the harmful effects of sunshine, and then you'll get only the benefits. You get plenty of those through diet, and your body tans perfectly, your face gets red. If you because the skin on your face is thinner and also adjacent to bone, it probably does not receive keratin and other protective nutrients as easily as more fatty, thick tissue, like, on your abdomen. So if you are also, and I think Ray, I think I learned this from Ray as well, actually. Sorry. So Ray mentions that keratins can oxidize in the body, and they do. That's what antioxidants do. Antioxidants receive oxidation. That's what vitamin C gets oxidized. That's how it performs as an antioxidant. The difference between things like vitamin C and keratin being oxidized, as opposed to like your DNA, is that they are designed by nature to receive oxidation. If you, say, for instance, consume store-bought carrot juice for keratin, though, all of that keratin through the juicing process and storage process is probably already oxidized. So if you drink a jar of carrot juice you bought from the store, you're probably just introducing lots of oxidation into your body, though, rather than using that keratin as an antioxidant in your body. So it's better instead to have whole food sources of keratin, like carrots and peaches and nectarines and leafy greens and stuff like that. Green foods like leafy greens like spinach are going to be very, very, very high in keratin. They just don't look red or orange because of the chlorophyll that's in there that then turns that color to green. But when when trees change color in the fall, they reveal their like trees become yellow and red and orange because that is keratin in green leaves, and the same thing happens in like leafy greens that we eat. If you leave broccoli or kale or spinach out on the counter for too long, they'll turn yellow, and that yellow is the keratin that is protective for you. So also, I found a study not too long ago. It was talking about how the antioxidant function of keratins actually requires activation by sunlight. So when you eat keratin, it actually doesn't really act as an antioxidant in your body until it's actually hit by sunlight. There's probably exceptions in the body for some reason or another, though. But generally, like your keratin is purposefully transported to the keratinocytes of the skin because it protects the skin from oxidative damage caused by sunlight exposure, so that you can get sunlight exposure to make vitamin D and do other things that are really important for sunlight exposure. So, what's really funny, actually, too. So you guys, or people have probably heard that of when some people will get an excess buildup of keratin, and one of the things that happens is that their palms turn especially orange. I haven't actually seen this though, so I haven't confirmed it myself, but I've heard anecdotal reports that if you have problems metabolizing keratin, that your palms will turn orange. Well, guess what? When you sweat, you actually secrete keratin. And one of the reasons that your palms turn so orange is because the palms become like a dispenser for keratin after you eat it. So that when you touch yourself and you rub like your skin, your palms can actually transfer keratin through sweat to other skin parts of your body. And so like if you like rub your face, like you can actually apply keratin from your palms to your face. That helps to protect against sun exposure, or the harmful effects of the harmful wavelengths of light. And then also, keratins are the color they are because they do not absorb that wavelength. So like yellow keratins don't absorb the yellow wavelength, and probably some red and orange in there. Same thing with red and oranges. Like those you're seeing those colors because they don't absorb those colors. And so those colors, and those are the colors that actually drive, like I mentioned earlier in the stream, about sunlight driving the mitochondrial respiratory chain. The reason that keratins are red and yellow and orange is to let those wavelengths through, because our tissues benefit directly from the red wavelengths of light. And that's well established. Lots of people are familiar with that concept of the red wavelengths. But anyway, so that's why keratins are really necessary for protection from sun exposure, the harmful effects of UV, like the higher wavelengths of light. And we need sun exposure every day, so we also need carotene in our diet daily in order to protect ourselves from that sunlight exposure. And then vitamin C protects ourselves from the oxidative damage caused by activation of oxidative energy production pathways, as well as also helps to regenerate carotene as well. So yeah. But what you can also do, Jamal, you can also put, polyunsaturated fats are also more susceptible to oxidative damage, though. And skin damage from sun exposure is mostly a consequence of the presence of polyunsaturated fats, which a lot of people don't understand, actually, though, is inherent to skin's biological metabolism. The skin is always several degrees cooler than the core of the body. And when body tissues drop in temperature, the body then desaturates saturated fats so that they are more malleable in reduced environment. You know, butter in the fridge, butter is composed largely of saturated fats, and in the refrigerator, it's solid. If the saturated fats that are in our body, which are the most protective fats, though, if they're in the skin, they and the skin becomes colder, they solidify and then cannot be transported through cellular pathways. So the skin has higher quantities of desaturase enzymes that desaturate protective saturated fats, because those fats will then impair metabolic pathways, because they literally they solidify in reduced temperature. But so you can also have a diet high in polyunsaturated fats that saturates that floods your body with unsaturated fats. And polyunsaturated fats, not monounsaturated, but polyunsaturated, are the most susceptible to oxidative damage. And because sunlight inherently causes oxidative stress, a diet high in polyunsaturated fat will increase skin damage from sunlight exposure than a diet high in saturated fat. But you can also apply saturated fat to your skin during sun exposure to increase your protection of the skin from sun damage. So if you take like coconut oil or shea butter and put it on your skin, you could even use butter oil if you want, but you might smell like a movie theater. If you use sources of those on your skin, like on your face, any surface, especially that is up facing, like the top of your chest, the back of your neck, your ears, your nose, your cheeks, your forehead, like those areas that get more direct, intense radiation from the sun at higher elevations, those are good places to put on coconut oil, so that your skin has more saturated fat in it, to better protect your skin from the potentially stressful effects of sun exposure. So, yeah. Anyway. I was out in the sun for like 2 hours yesterday. It was so wonderful. Oh. And now it's rainy and cloudy here today. So that's one of the reasons why I'm online right now instead of out for a walk. Okay, anyway, that was a nice stream. Thank you everyone for coming along and hanging out. Like I mentioned earlier, my book update is gonna be out in a little while. I'm still working on it, but I'm making very good progress. I keep saying a few weeks, but it keeps getting pushed more because research is never finished. But I am making progress, so it'll be out sometime soon. If you aren't following me, you can hit subscribe to get notified for future streams. Also on Twitter, the links for those are below. You can also support my channel and my work at Patreon. Oh, by the way, I saw you re-signed up, Jamal. Thank you. I really appreciated that. It was nice to see your name pop up again. You can find that information there. Get my books, read them. They're very useful. Teach you lots about health things. What else? Yeah. Spread the word, share these things with people. Yeah, my book update is going to have a lot of new and really great stuff in it that I'm working on. And I really teased apart a lot of pathways that like are relevant to these things and like what I already talk about in my book and why they work, and like, so I'm really excited. I want to release it now, but there's stuff I got to finish, and then I have to I'm gonna have to spell check the whole thing, which you will all know is quite a struggle for me to do. So the spell check pass, I have to do like 2 or 3 of them, and that itself takes like a week to do alone. Once I'm even done with the edit, so we'll see. But anyway, thank you all for your support, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your week. Take care of yourselves and feed yourselves, and all that fun stuff. And I will see you next time.